At exactly 6 a.m., my daughter-in-law was banging on my front door so hard that it echoed through the entire New York street. She screamed my name repeatedly, demanding that I open the door immediately. I stood silently behind the curtains, watching her shadow move across the glass. Then my son arrived carrying a crowbar. He walked straight up the steps with anger in his eyes, shouting that if I refused to open the door, he would force his way inside. Neighbors started opening their windows, drawn by the noise and tension unfolding outside. What none of them knew was that I was not alone inside that house, and when the door finally opened, the truth standing behind me would change everything my son believed about that morning. My name is Richard, and I am 73 years old. I have lived most of my life in New York, building a modest but secure future with my late wife. Together we worked hard, saved carefully, and finally paid off our home in a quiet neighborhood where we raised our son David. After my wife passed away, that house became both my comfort and my silence. I trusted David and his wife Melissa completely because they were my only family left. At first, their visits felt normal. David often came over pretending to check on repairs, while Melissa brought groceries and acted caring in every possible way. But over time, their conversations always circled back to one thing: my house, my savings, and what would happen after I was gone. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just practical family planning. But slowly, it started feeling more like pressure than concern. Melissa became increasingly direct, asking about inheritance, insurance, and property documents. David suggested adding his name to financial accounts so he could help manage things. Whenever I hesitated, they made me feel guilty, as if I was being difficult or ungrateful. But something about their urgency never felt right. Everything changed after a quiet afternoon at my bank in New York. The manager called me into a private room and informed me that someone had been making repeated inquiries into my accounts and property details. No money was missing, but the nature of the questions was too specific to ignore. I had never authorized anyone to access my information. That moment planted a doubt I could no longer silence. Not long after, I overheard Melissa on a phone call while she was inside my home. She was discussing renovations and changes to the house as if ownership was already decided. She spoke confidently, describing which rooms she would redesign and how soon she would begin work. Listening from the hallway, I felt a chill run through me. It was no longer speculation. It sounded like planning. I decided to take action quietly. I hired a private investigator in New York to find out the truth. I expected reassurance, but instead received evidence that shattered my trust completely. Over several weeks, the investigator uncovered messages and meetings where David and Melissa discussed gaining control of my property. They spoke about inheritance timelines, property value, and how soon they could take over the house if I moved into assisted care. The realization felt like a slow collapse of everything I believed about my family. I spent nights sitting alone in silence, wondering when I had stopped being a father and started becoming an obstacle in their plans. Instead of confronting them immediately, I chose to protect myself first. I contacted my attorney and began restructuring everything legally. My will was revised, my accounts secured, and my estate fully reviewed. Most importantly, I created a charitable trust that would redirect my wealth toward education and community programs in New York after my passing. I also changed every lock in the house without telling anyone. 3 days later, everything reached its breaking point. At 6 a.m., Melissa arrived first, furious that her key no longer worked. She banged on the door and demanded answers while shouting my name across the street. I remained silent inside the house. Minutes later, David arrived carrying a crowbar, furious and determined to force his way inside if necessary. The neighbors gathered, watching in shock as the situation escalated. But something had already changed inside that house. 2 black vehicles pulled into the driveway. The moment David saw them, his expression froze. My attorney stepped out first, followed by a retired judge and a uniformed officer. The street went silent. Even Melissa stopped shouting as reality began to shift in front of her eyes. The attorney calmly explained that all legal arrangements had already been finalized. The property remained entirely under my ownership, and no one else had any legal claim to it. Then he revealed the final truth. The majority of my estate had already been placed into a charitable trust supporting students and community development across New York. Everything David and Melissa believed they were about to inherit no longer existed in the way they imagined. Documents were presented. Messages were shown. Every piece of evidence from the investigation was laid out in front of them. There was no argument left to make. For the first time, they understood this was not a negotiation. It was the outcome of their own actions. Finally, I opened the door and stepped outside. The entire street fell silent.